the music, we could have a little bit of fun too. So I brought my trusty little iPhone with me, which has songs on it, which I picked out to make a part of the story. So let me begin. Is this the blackboard? Can I write on this?
Yeah, you can erase it.
Louis, could you jump up and erase what's up there? We don't need that.
I'm under red lock, don't worry. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to put down some names and things, not because I expect you to memorize them, but because it gives me something to do while I organize my thoughts, which are not always as well organized as they might be. So, I was born in a city called Antwerp, which is in a country called Belgium. The name of the city itself is kind of fascinating. It comes from the Flemish or Dutch handwerpen, to throw the hand. The reason is there was an ancient legend. See, Antwerp sits on the river, just like Philadelphia and many other cities. And in ancient days, there was a giant who would collect tolls from people who tried to cross the river. And a lot of people didn't like that. So they got the Duke of Brabant, who was the big macho man there, and he went and fought the giant, cut off his hand, and threw it away, and it landed in a well. Now, that's why the place was named Throwing the Hand, Antwerpen. And if you go to Antwerp today, you can find the well with the hand there. And I was a little boy, about 5 or 6 years old. My father took me there. Didn't see the hand. I was very disappointed. So that was my first introduction to history and disappointment at the same time. It's not quite the way they tell it to you, is it? Okay. Now, let's go back in time to, say, 1940. Well, approximately 1940, which I started school in 1938. And like you, I went to a private school. It was a little bit different than yours. It was different in that, first of all, it was a religious day school, so we learned Hebrew in the morning and French in the afternoon. And I had the fortune or misfortune of trying to learn to read and write from left to right and right to left at the same time. This was not easy. But we did all kinds of things there, some of them which you will probably recognize. Well, maybe not. Okay. We sang a lot of songs like there we go. We'll play that song later. I had Frere Jacques on here. Sofia, can you play for me? Yes.
I know both French and Hebrew.
Oh, Mazel tov. Mazel tov. Et la partie great? Vous parlez français?
Si.
Bien? Vous parlez
Un
français?
petit peu.
Un petit peu.
I've got it.
That's just the beginning.
Yes. A little bit.
You recognize that song? Come on, everybody. Sonne le matin. dun, 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 dun. Yes, ma'am.
My mom was born in Belgium.
Oh, where?
And I think, I don't remember exactly where.
Okay.
But we go there every winter and sometimes in the summer too.
Oh, have you been to Antwerp?
No.
Well, you should go and find that. If you find that hand, let me know. I want to see it. Because I think my dad was pulling my leg, but he did that a lot. Now, one of the other things I learned in school was that things were not the way they seemed to be. For instance, my first name is Jacques. And I remember when I learned to write, I didn't want to put an S on the end because I was one person. And I learned that you put an S, it becomes plural. So I asked my father, what was that all about? I refused to do this. This is really quite a promotion. I was a difficult child. He said, well, because it's such a nice name, my father said, you share it with a lot of people. And so because the name is shared, we put an S so it belongs to everybody who's got that name. And I thought that was kind of nice. Anyway, went to school there, and things went along very nicely for a while. And we spent the summer at the shore, and we spent the winter in Antwerp and so forth, like any other family would. On May 10th, or let's say, in May 1940, the rumblings of World War II were becoming very strong. My father rented a cottage or a villa near the shore, hoping that if the Germans did invade, we would have a place where we would be free. Nobody thought that the Germans would win the entire war that fast and take over all of Europe, but they did. And so on May 10th, the Germans invaded Belgium, and that was the day when my childhood ended. Now, I don't know as you grow up whether you will have a particular day. I hope if it's a good one, but mine was not a good one. That was the day we were living in a little village called Chapin, and I'm going to take off my jacket, it's kind of warm in here. And that's, I promise, that's all. So, nights and May 10th, there were all kinds of horrible noises. I can remember being scared to death. And I remember wondering, what's going on here? What's all this noise? What's all these flashes of light that I see from my bedroom window? And Mademoiselle kept telling us, well, there's a storm at sea, and the sailors were signaling to each other, and we're sending up flares, etc. Well, what would happen when, of course, the war would go? Well, the next morning, which was a Sunday, I expected my parents back. Remember, we were the three kids with Mademoiselle. Well, they didn't come back that fast. As a matter of fact, as time went on, I can remember being kind of scared. What was going on here? And Mademoiselle kept trying to reassure us and tell her it was okay, it was okay. She didn't say okay, but similar kind of expression. And finally, in the late afternoon, the car pulled up, and my parents came out. And I'd never seen them looking so bedraggled, so unhappy, so crying. Their clothes were dirty. They had to take a train from Antwerp to Chapin, which normally takes an hour and a half, 2 hours at most. It took them all day to escape Antwerp and to meet us there. And I knew then and there that things from here on in are going to be different. They're going to be scary. And they're going to be very difficult to deal with. So what happened? Well, we took off by train first, and when we arrived at a certain place, which is a small town called Lille in France. We crossed the border to get into France, and we met up with the rest of our extended family, and there were 3 families, and we had 2 small cars, and a lot of people, and we started fleeing towards where we thought would be a free place to go, which would be Marseille. But on the way, this took several days of traveling, certain things happened, some of which were kind of interesting. And I wrote a story about one of these, and I'd like to read that story to you now. If I give you the title in French, will you translate it for the class?
Okay.
Il ne faut pas donner un coup de pied sur la croûte de pain.
You don't, you can't, kick the breadcrumbs.
The bread. The
Yes.
croûte is the
Oh yeah, that's part of the bread.
You can't kick a slice of a piece of bread. Merci beaucoup, mademoiselle. All right, so let me read this story as it is written. And if there are any words here or anything you don't understand, sometimes I will. See, one of the problems in writing these things is when you learn a new language and you start to write in that language, you start to use words which are only used in writing, which are not used in conversation. There's a difference, I'm sure you know, between what's written in the book and the way people talk to each other. So if I get into a word here that's a little too learn English, raise your hand, I'll explain to you. Don't be shy, please. All right. It was early fall, or perhaps even late summer of 1940. Fall is the season, but also is fall of the hopes and dreams of our families. Belgium had fallen, and we were refugees. Strange word, refugees. Looking for a refuge, but from what and to what? I was almost 8 when the near idyllic spring of 1940 was punctuated on the night of May 10th by the sirens and bombs which became cacophonous sounds accompanying me for the next 4 years. Anybody know what cacophony means? Yes. Loud, very noisy, no meaning to it. It's a Greek word. Where did I learn a Greek word? I don't know. I like it. It's a nice word. I can remember leaving Chapin, this was the town I told you about, a small town on the Franco-Belgian border near the seaside. My father had rented a villa there for my mother and 2 younger brothers. We stayed there much to my anger, having been cut off from finishing my 2nd year at the school I went to. I loved the school I went to. But somewhere before the end of the school year, my dad thought it was a good idea to get us out of Antwerp. And I really did not want to leave because we were going to miss the party at the end of the year and all through and stuff like that. Fortunately, we did. I remember somehow getting onto a train in Belgium heading south for France. There had been an arrangement, I found out later, to meet with 2 other families who were related to us. They each had children, one older than I, one of whom named Rachel or Rachel in French, who will figure in the story to which I owe the title. Back on the train. Here we were, my mother and father, and my 2 younger brothers, aged 3 and 4, fleeing from a comfortable life in Antwerp to destinations unknown. I remember the trains being crowded, not too clean, and soldiers all around. At first, these were Belgian soldiers with whom I could identify. Then, as we passed customs, the soldiers were French. These trains, or at least this one, was not like the trains I had ridden in the past. No dining car, no sleeping car, sounds like the monorail. We had brought some food with us, and every stop the train made, we were surrounded by food and beverage vendors. I don't remember much of this except for one incident which floated back to my consciousness over 50 years later. At one of the stops in France, a French soldiers are called poilus, which means covered with hair. And the reason they're called that goes back to World War I, but I'll tell you that story some other time. For reason, gave me bread and butter sandwich from his own supply. I don't remember whether I said merci, monsieur, thank you, sir, or not. But if I can, let me say it now. Monsieur le soldat, vous étiez un rayon de lumière dans l'encrochement de la longue, difficile nuit. Mr. Soldier, you are a beam of light in a long and difficult night. 15 some years later, I remember this story. But wait, there's more. Greedily, I bit into the tartine. Qu'est-ce que c'est une tartine?
It's like a sandwich.
Yeah, like a sandwich. We call it tartine. We're very hungry. You're hungry. And what is the taste of this? Salty like seawater. I did not know that we in Belgium had favored sweet or unsalted butter, and the French praline had a tartine made with salted butter. It's only now that I can remember this difference. If you've never had the difference between the two, it's quite different. I'm skipping a part here. We were headed towards Marseille, where we hoped to get to the United States. Often we would leave the town as the Germans entered. To top it all off, one of my brothers became ill. What sickness do you think? Yes.
German measles?
Correctamundo! Yes, the German measles. Now, can you imagine what it must be like escaping the Germans through France and coming down with the German measles? Well, there it was. But there's an interesting story with that, too. Yes?
Which one of your brothers got sick?
Pardon?
Which one of your brothers got sick?
The youngest one, Eric. And we wanted to find, we thought it was the German measles, but then we wanted to find a doctor to be sure what the news there were. Well, it turns out there was only one doctor in this town, little village in France. And he was the mayor of the town also. So we went, or someone in the family went to see his honor, the mayor, and he said, as the mayor of this, I cannot go see Belgians because you have already given up to the Germans. But as a doctor, I'll see you after office hours. So there was a spark of humanity left, even in this politician, and he came and told us what to do. He may or may not have given us medicine, I don't remember. But anyway, that's what happened. Anyway, we stopped somewhere to rest and buy food, some tiny place in southern France. I remember we were parked on the perimeter of some kind of field. Many other refugees in their cars were there too. Soon enough, boys being boys, an impromptu football soccer to Americans was started amongst a group of us from different places. The game was noisy and boisterous. You know what boys are. I think we let out a considerable amount of our fear, and we were scared, and frustration at this game. Somehow, my cousin Rachel, who was about 5 years older than I, was attracted to the game. She stood and watched us boys use a large crust of bread for a football. We had no sports equipment, but make do was part of every child's armamentarium, n'est-ce pas? At one point, I was sort of alone in a part of the field kicking the bread, and Rachel said to me, il ne faut pas faire ça avec le pain. Un jour, tu n'auras pas.
Don't do it with the bread because one day you won't have any.
Precisely. Exactly. Little did I know that that day would come in about a year and a half, and for about 4 years, I would not have any bread. So that's the story, and we go on, and we wind up in Marseille. Marseille is a big city. It's an old city. It was originally called Massilia by the Greeks, who were the first settlers on the Mediterranean. It's a big port city. Yes?
I have a house near Marseille.
You have a house near Marseille. Wonderful. In the Midi. It's hot there in the summer, isn't it hot? Yes, very hot. By the winter of 1940, I read another story. Do you know stories okay? I read stories. I make them up as I go along. Things are true. By the winter of 1940, we were ensconced in a villa in Marseille. 4 families, all related, comprising of 9 adults, 4 pre-teeners, 2 teeners, who all shared a not too large house and a yard, awaiting the opportunity to come to the United States. Suddenly, the word visa, affidavit, consul, ambassador all became part of my vocabulary. I did not know, however, what they meant, other than they were important. Each day's visit by the postman brought hope, but more often, disappointment. In this villa, we all ate together in what seemed to be a very large room with a large table. Perhaps it wasn't that large, but I was a little boy. The table was the center of all activity. Some of the men played cards, listened to the radio for news, and the women knitted. Cast, pearl, cast, pearl. I was fascinated by this. Tried it once or twice, and I discovered boredom. Don't want knitting. Anybody here knit? Do you like it? Chacun a son goût. Translate? Right, merci beaucoup. Food was a problem, a very serious problem. Many mouths to feed and little food to be had. The French were xenophobic. Now there's a word I mentioned. Xenophobic. Anybody know xenophobic?
Something
Afraid of distrusting of foreigners, not liking foreigners.
Afraid of foreigners, strangers, literally. Xenon, there's a Greek word, phobos comes from the Greek word to fear, to be afraid of. Xenon is a stranger, fear of strangers. All right. Marseille was a very cosmopolitan port city. It was populated not only by the Marseillais, who spoke a language all of their own most of the time, and many refugees, as well as a variety of Near Eastern and North African merchants. Anyhow, one day the table was abuzz. Everybody was talking. One of the adults had made contact with a Jewish man from Greece, maybe it was Turkey, we weren't sure, who owned a chalva factory. Everybody know what chalva is? Chalva is a delicacy made out of crushed sesame seeds and sugar. It's delicious. It's absolutely delicious, but let me tell you, it's mostly sugar. Mostly sugar. Yes.
My mom made it once for me. She called it something else, but it was really, really good.
Okay, well, there have been lots of ways of doing it. So there's also a chalvachum, which is, I'll talk about, never mind, that's another time. Okay. I remember going to the factory with my father, being amazed at the huge cauldrons, mixing machines, packing machines, and above all, chalva. Chalva in huge blocks in all flavors and smells. We took home several large yellow tins of chalva from the chalva king, as I named him in my mind. And we continued to get chalva from him for some time. Meal times became chalva time. Chalva with bread, chocolate chalva, vanilla chalva, pistachio chalva, and chalva chum, which was a special kind of chalva, the rest of which I can't recall, but it was very good. So I still love chalva, even though I'm absolutely forbidden, having diabetes, forbidden to eat much of it because it's, as I said, mostly sugar. But boy, is it good. Okay. But you know, things were not all funny or very good. It was, there were a couple of funny things that happened in school too. One was, of course, parents would not dream of not having us go to school, so I went to a French lycée, which was a school in France. And I remember having a trouble there. First of all, I was Belgian, and French can tend to be kind of xenophobic, and sort of thought I was some strange kind of person. And no, it was because French and Belgian French are slightly different. For instance, in Belgium, I learned that the word for 70 is septembre. But in France, they say soixante-dix. And I could not understand. Septembre means 7 tens. Soixante-dix, these mean 60 plus 10. So you had soixante, and it becomes very long and difficult, and I could never master that. And I was made all kinds of fun. They had also fun with the French and the Belgian French word for 90, which is, and in France, 90. Very good. Thank you. You get an A, of course. So there were some difficulties there. But life sort of went on. And I just want you to see that even while all this was going on, people were still living their lives. People were still trying their very best under very, very difficult situations to make it. Now, towards the beginning of 1941, we had a very difficult situation arise. And I want to read you a story about that. And this story is called Casablanca. Have any of you ever seen the movie Casablanca?
Heard of it.
It's one that you must see. It's probably one of the best American movies ever made. So help me see it several times. Okay. It was 1941, or maybe late 1940. I don't recall the date. However, it was one of the more difficult times for my mother, known as Gil. Her name was Augusta, but we called her Gil. You see, my two brothers and I were allowed to accompany my mother from Marseille through Spain to Portugal. From there, we were to board a ship and sail to the United States, to freedom, to peace, and to grow up without fear. That was the dream. Yes?
My parents used to live in Portugal.
They still live in Portugal?
No, they used to.
Oh, okay. In Lisbon?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been there. Lisboa. Fear had become a companion since May 10, 1940, when the Germans invaded Belgium. Okay. We got as far as Marseille, and here we were waiting for a chance to get to Portugal, to Lisbon, to get a boat across the Atlantic and come to the States. There was a problem, however. The Spanish authorities had agreed with the Germans that men under 42 and over 16 would not be allowed to transit through Spain, for fear they would join the British in Gibraltar. And I wrote here, ha! My father, of Russia as he was known to all, Papa, to me and my brothers, joined an army? Incroyable! My father would not have joined any kind of army under any circumstances whatsoever. But, government said no, we had no choice. Change your plans. Not unusual in those days. My mother, my two brothers, and I would take a train from Marseille to Lisbon, which is in Portugal. Papa would take a boat to Casablanca, which is in Africa. Do you know enough geography? You want to join on that? Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, that didn't bring my point.
You have Spain here,
Right.
Portugal here. What's the waterway that
Say,
separates? What is it? The Strait of Gibraltar that separates
Right.
the tip of Spain from Morocco, right?
Right.
Okay. Oh, good.
Okay? You all with me where we are now in southern France, where it's always hot, especially in the summer. Believe me, you can put a pail of water out in August in your backyard. By the time you come back, you can't put your hand in it, it's that hot. N'est-ce pas?
Yeah. My grandfather has a house in the south of France and we go there in the summer.
Yeah. All right, now, at that time I was about 9 years old. I was 9 years old. My brothers were 6 and 4. And I was, to some, still a brat who had to comment on everything he saw. My big mouth almost cost us our lives, or at least 2 occasions. We traveled through Spain in a very crowded, slow train. There was little food to be had. We bought some pain d'épices. Qu'est-ce que c'est ça, pain
It's
d'épices?
like red.
It's gingerbread.
Yeah.
Okay. And with us, and subsisted largely on the sticky, sweet, dark, and rather unappetizing stuff for about 5 days. Like gingerbread, I guess it's fine. I have not liked it since. I don't know if I liked it then either. But I wondered if I was a brat. Let me tell you 2 quickies, which I didn't write down here, just came to mind. I thought you kids might enjoy. Do you know if I call you kids?
Yeah.
Boys, girls, ladies and gentlemen, any question?
No,
You know, when you go from one country to the other, there's what they call the customs officers. They're people who make sure you don't bring stuff you're not supposed to bring. So we are taken from France into Spain. We go into this building, and we're made to wait. They only make you wait. They love to make you wait. And this woman comes out and ushers my mother, my two brothers, and I into this room. In this room, which is about half the size of this room, there's a picture on the wall. Oh, I remember it. There was a picture on the wall of Francisco Franco. Does anybody know who he was? Yes.
Yes, like the king or something.
You're close. No, Francisco Franco was the dictator of Spain. He was not a very nice man. He threw out the kings of Spain. Yes.
I was just in Spain, like over spring break,
Right.
and then I was on the bus and they were telling me about how like messed up all this stuff,
They did.
and now they're
He did. He was one nice guy. Anyway, I walked in. Here I am, a little boy, 9 years old, a little shorter than I am, not a lot shorter than I am, with short pants. And I look up there, and I point to the picture, and I said, "Mother, Servilo, ¿cuál es español?"
Wait,
Servilo, ¿cuál es español?
is he the king of Spain?
King of Spain. Well, they just thrown their king out, and the lady said in perfect French. All of a sudden, she spoke French to my mother. "You should teach your child about the revolution and how we got rid of our king." My mother thought we were going to be taken out and shot. Well, obviously, they missed. Fortunately, I think. But anyway, so finally we got. I was especially entranced by something else in Spain. Two things. One was the state police, the Guardia Civil. They wore Napoleon-type hats, the kind of hats you've seen in old movies. You know, those funny hats that shaped like that. And that's what they wore. And I thought this was very funny. And my mother said, "Don't you dare laugh at them." I remember being very scared of these guys. And I also learned the interesting thing, you know, we were little kids, and at the station, people would come up and try and talk to us. And all I could say was, "No habla español." I don't speak Spanish. And then they would say, "How can you say that if you're speaking Spanish now?" So I got totally and completely confused. Anyway, we finally got, after 4 or 5 days on this train through Spain, and the rain really wasn't the plane, we finally found a room in a boarding house, and it seemed suddenly, after a year almost, that there were unimaginable quantities of food available, as much as you wanted. No need to share carefully and to cut everything up into little pieces. All of a sudden, I don't remember if it was good or not. I remember two things about Portuguese food. One, they pour olive oil on anything. You sit down at the table, there's a cruet of olive oil. So you pour, you don't taste it first, just pour olive oil on it. That's what they did. And the other thing about Lisbon was that there were flocks of turkeys in the street. You'd find people, you know, like you heard cattle, you see the cattle, they were herding turkeys. Which was, I'd never seen a turkey before. I didn't know what were these strange looking birds. But there we did. And every day we went to the post office to see if we had a letter from Father telling us when he would arrive by boat from Africa to Lisbon. Finally, the dreaded truth came to the post office. There was no boat service from Rouen to Lisbon. It was discontinued until the end of the war. Now imagine yourselves with one of your parents, either one, in one country and one continent, and the other parent, on another one, and no way of getting from one to another. A war going on, and you knew it was not good. However, there was still some hope. My father wrote and said that the Portuguese consul in Casablanca told him that if my father got news that his children were seriously ill or possibly dying, he, the consul, would have to do the humane thing and issue my father a permit to board a commercial flight from Casablanca to Lisbon. He was a nice guy. So, my mother refused. No, she said. If I write a telegram like that, God will punish me. The children, who knows what other calamity would follow. Furthermore, lying is a sin. Of course, I was not then and never became privy to my father's persuasive powers, but a telegram was sent. Come at once, children, seriously ill. The cable went. The consul was good as his word. A few days later, my father landed at the airport in Estoril, which is a little town right outside of Lisbon. And he was sporting a mustache. My father was, not the theater. I didn't recognize him. As I write this some 70 years later, I seem to remember that he brought each of us 3 children a stick of chewing gum, which in those days when you went on a plane, they give you a stick of chewing gum. I didn't know what chewing gum was, but this was a great delicacy. I thought you ate it. My mother was in many ways a superstitious woman. To her last day, when any of us kids became ill, she would muse out loud about the telegram. It is ironic that she died first at a young age, and we children are now considerably older than she was when she died. It is also ironic that her oldest son, me, also believes in the power of words. Okay. The next step in this, and then we'll stop for a few minutes. The next step was leaving Europe by boat to go to the United States. Now, this, just having those papers was a feat in itself. People were dying, people were being killed, people couldn't get out. It's not like today, all you do is have enough money or a credit card and buy a ticket, you go wherever the hell you want, wherever the heck you want. So we landed on a boat called the Simonet. Now this boat, an American ship, used to sail between Miami and Havana, which is where? In Cuba, correct. And that's a short trip. I mean, you can almost swim it, or some people try to anyway. So this boat was not really fit for an Atlantic voyage, but you took fast, whatever you could, because we had to get out. We left, and as soon as we were away from the shoreline, you know who, your new friend, me, became violently seasick and remained seasick every single day on a 7-day trip, which was considered to be one of the worst cross-Atlantic crossings in a long time. It was a very bad season. It was in February. The weather was awful. The ship was too small. We had all kinds of problems. During the trip, we passed by the island of Bermuda, which is owned by who? Who owns Bermuda? Pardon? No. Yes. England. Okay? So we had to stop there because they wanted to make sure that we were not bringing German spies. Was there a question? Okay. So the one day we weren't allowed off the boat, but I did see Bermuda. It looked very pretty. Have any of you been there? Is it very pretty? Yeah. So anyhow, that was the one meal I ate in that whole trip at the table without getting sick afterwards. And once the ship took off and we lost sight of the land, so we got back to New York, no go. I was sick up. All right, let's take a, 5 minutes? You know it?
No.
Every day, away, away. because we're going to be doing another boat trip. This is just a very funny little song. It's about a little boat that empty navire. There was once a little boat which had never sailed to sea. And it tells how the little boat really wanted to float away at sea, and one day it floated all the way down to the Mediterranean. The problem was it was a paper boat, it didn't last very long once it got to the sea. But it's a cute little song, and I remember this. So I found this on iTunes. You can find even one on iTunes, I guess. And so I thought I'd play it because we came to the United States. It was February or March 1941, and we were not allowed to stay in this country. Because in those days, in order to stay in the United States, when you came from another country, no matter what the reason was, you had to have what they called a quota number. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but it took years to get a quota number. And meanwhile, the Germans had already occupied France, Belgium, England was at war, Poland was occupied. The war was coming to a very, very dangerous and difficult time. Right. Anyhow, we landed in New York. Now, I did not speak a word of English. The only English I knew was, how do you do? The reason I knew that was because I thought it was the funniest word I've ever heard in my life. How do you do? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You translate it literally, it still doesn't mean anything. So, in the course of roughly a month or 2 months, I learned to speak English, and I haven't stopped talking since, much to a lot of people's great regret. But nevertheless, I did learn to speak English and continued speaking French. So I am very happy to be able to do both. But I'll continue in English for most of you, anyhow. So we landed in Manila. Manila is in the Philippine Islands, which is right above Australia. They want to point to it. Yeah, look further up, up more. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Now, yes.
Weren't you that, wait, wasn't you, when we were watching this movie, and it was about how the Philippines accepted people from Europe?
Yes.
And they were
Yes. Did you see that on TV? I was interested in that. Do you remember me now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm real. It really exists. You can touch me if you want. Wash your hands first, or afterwards, or both. Anyhow. At that time, the Philippines was an American possession or an American colony. We thought we could stay there for whatever time it took and then come back to the States and everything would be fine. And I'll tell you a funny story about learning English and being in an English-speaking country. One of the first things my parents did was make me go to
English school.
English school, right? You weren't going to stop school just because there's a war. There's no excuse not to go to school. You have to learn the multiplication tables and all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, I went to school and they gave me a test to see how well I understood the language. Now you must understand that in French, most words are pronounced the way they're spelled. And this is a story which my family loves to tell about me.
Freddie, grab the blue.
From,
The blue is our best marker. That'll work better for you.
and I remember asking my mother, a Jew can't ride, a Jew rides a horse, doesn't he? And my mother, what kind of question is that? Of course. Then I realized there was a question on this test which asked, can a duck ride a horse? Well, I didn't know duck. I thought it meant a duke. And I said yes. This is why I never graduated school. But that's, you got that? Well, they tried their best. Thanks. So anyhow, took some tests and I started going to school in Manila. And I learned that ducks do not ride horses. This is a very important lesson if you learn nothing else in school this year. Ducks do not ride horses. Dukes, on the other hand, do ride horses. That's all they do, is they ride horses only well. Anyhow, by December 1941, December 8th to be specific, the war, Pearl Harbor, yes. Sorry, the war started and the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, which is in Hawaii. Very good. And that started World War II. And within a matter of weeks, the Japanese army had taken over and we became guests of the Imperial Japanese Army. Now, you have to think of your own village, your own town, your own city where you live, where all of a sudden, a group of people who do not speak a word of the language you speak, but who spoke to each other in a language which you did not understand. They all carried very big guns, the end of which was a very big, shiny, sharp bayonet. And they would not put up with anything other than to obey the orders. So, yes?
There's a movie called Red Dawn.
A movie what?
It's called Red Dawn. And, it's called the Koreans.
These weren't Koreans. But, yeah, you're right, thank you. So we were under Japanese occupation. Now I'm sure you've all seen or heard about the horrors and the atrocities which the Japanese perpetrated on the innocent people. But you know, in any situation, there are always a few spots here and there of things which just sort of don't fit in and give you another glimpse of what the world might be like. So we were living at that time in an apartment house on a street called MH Del Pilar, which was near a very nice place. And let me tell you a story about what happened. One day, sometime around noon or later, Eric, my youngest brother, was riding his scooter. Now, we didn't have scooters, but you know, necessity is the mother of invention, they say. People take two pieces of wood, put a roller skate on each end, and another piece of wood at right angles to it, and there you go, voila, you have a scooter. They're very, very noisy, as you can only imagine. So one day, around noon or a little later, my brother Eric was riding his scooter up and down our street. His circuit took him directly in front of a house occupied by Nazis. There were a lot of Germans living in Manila who had come there long before the war and established businesses and what have you. And some of them were Nazis. And how do we know they were Nazis? Well, they had a big, yes.
They had a swastika.
They had what?
They had a swastika.
They had, on their house, they had a big flag with a swastika. Okay, very good. They had, you all know what a swastika is?
Yes.
Yeah, too bad. Something which would best be forgotten. But anyhow. And back and forth my brother went, oblivious to the hot sun, to the fact that it was siesta time. You all know what siesta is?
No,
Yeah,
what's
what?
the
Right.
after lunch?
After lunch, you take a rest, siesta. Okay. And to everything, all my brother would do was have fun. Then, sometime during the siesta, the German man came out of his house, furious at having his siesta disturbed by the noise of Eric's scooter, and he took the scooter from Eric and went back into his own house. Eric was stunned. was scared. He was heartbroken. He cried and cried some more as he walked back toward our apartment. Sobbing away, he did notice that coming towards him was no one else other than Corporal Muna. Now, who's Corporal Muna? Corporal Muna was a corporal in the Japanese army who had befriended us kids. We're thinking it was Muna, the closest we could come to, whatever his name was. He became friendly with us. And he saw Eric. Now, Muna did not speak English, and we did not speak Japanese, I think. But it didn't take him long to see that Eric was kind of unhappy. Children's tears speak a universal language. Somehow he managed to get the story of what happened to Eric. And now he, Corporal Muna, became angry. Corporal Muna went back to his billet where the soldiers were kept. And shortly after, returned with a half a dozen or so of Japanese soldiers with fixed bayonets. Now, the Japanese soldiers were not much taller than Eric, and with their rifles and fixed bayonets, they were almost as tall, and in some cases taller than they were. Sign language and grunts very quickly negotiated the scooter to its rightful owner. The Japanese knocked on the door, and they told him, whatever they did, give the kid back his scooter. So Eric gratefully picks up his scooter. Eric's about even smaller than that. He's about 6 years old, and he's carrying his scooter. A few steps after he walks out, Corporal Muna stops Eric and says, "Ride your scooter back and forth in front of that German's house." And he stood guard with a gun, with bayonets, to let the little Jewish boy from Belgium make noise for the Nazis. That's one of the nice stories. There are other horror, but I don't want to tell you horror stories. You've seen them in movies, television. Let me give you some of the human things that happen. Because no matter where you are, no matter what is happening, it is my firm believer that there are some people somewhere in that group that have a spark of humanity. And under the right conditions, it will come out. And I think Corporal Muna was one of those. And the Japanese soldiers stood around and kept urging Eric to keep on riding until he was too tired to continue doing that. Okay, we're running a little long. Let me skip ahead a little bit to another good story here. I started off by telling you a story about a tartine, a piece of bread, and so forth. Bread was impossible to get in the Philippines. They don't grow wheat in that part of the world, and to make bread, you need wheat. You don't have wheat, you don't make bread. You don't have bread, you don't eat bread. If you're used to eating bread, you don't have it. You learn to miss it. To this day, the meal without bread is difficult for me because of the years spent without having bread. And I also find it very difficult to throw away bread, no matter how stale and moldy it gets. I feed the squirrels or whatever, but I can't just throw it out. It's bread. All right, let me read. Obviously, the war came to an end. The Americans came back. We went through about a week or so of horror when the Battle of Manila was being fought, but we were fortunate enough that at least we were living in a part of the city which was not destroyed by the Japanese. So let me tell you a story about the Americans coming back, and we'll wind up there and see where we are, because it's a good place to wrap things up, make a sandwich, if you will. It was February 1945. The war was over, or almost all over. For us, the 5 Lipetzes who survived the war years in Manila, it was over. The Americans were back, and our return to our extended family, to a new life and to freedom had begun. There was no question in our minds that the horror was over, that all things would improve for us. Yes, there was still the fear of a hidden Japanese sniper. You all know what a sniper is? There was little food. The water was obtained from hand-dug wells and boiled before use. There was no electricity, and we did not really know the whereabouts and welfare of our only friend in Manila, which we last heard from, or from our family in the United States, which we hadn't heard from since 1941, 4 years. We were living with 2 other families in a large house on the outskirts of Manila. The house was built either during or soon after the turn of the century, the turn of the 18th to the 19th century, the 20th century, and was relatively large, cool, and comfortable. We occupied part of the first floor, and the other 2 families occupied the rest. Mr. Rifkin, the landlord, and his wife and daughter Lola, it really wasn't Lola, occupied the second floor. And whatever Lola wanted, Lola got. I don't remember the names of the other family on the first floor, except there were no men, just a group of older and younger women who were all somehow related to each other. Of all the foods we lacked, and we lacked plenty of it was bread that we most missed. We dreamt of bread, thought of bread, wished for bread, but had none. Bread, the staff of life, lechem, the ever-present accompaniment of all 3 meals in Belgium, is a major part of a tartine. Well, what is a tartine? Well, as the young lady told us, tartine is simply a piece of bread, real bread, covered with butter, real butter, sprinkled with such flavors as chocolate shavings or even just plain or jelly, whatever you want. It's a tartine. The tartine was a reward, a snack, a quick meal. And now, just a minute. A few days, or perhaps even a week after the Americans had liberated us, I became very daring, or perhaps more daring. I wandered to the American bivouac nearby and started some conversations with the GIs. Here I was, an undernourished, scrawny, I believe it, scrawny little boy of 12 years old, wandering around with battle-weary soldiers. Of course, I too was battle-weary. The flight from Europe and the life under ever increasingly dangerous Japanese occupation were battles too. So, we exchanged war stories. The soldiers showed me pictures of their families in the United States and offered me some food. Now, actually, they saw me stare at a loaf of bread that was being cut up for dinner. I must have been mesmerized. You know what mesmerized means?
Yes.
By that slice of bread. All I can remember is one of the soldiers hacked off a big piece of that bread and gave it to me and said, "Take it home to your folks." I said, "Thank you," and I ran off as fast as my chubby little legs, my scrawny little legs could take me. I must have run the quarter mile or so back to our home, where we lived. The slice of bread was wrapped up in a cloth bandana, and I brought it to my mother.